Hello viewers, welcome back to the lab. Sorry it's been so long since I last made a video. There's been a lot of things happening both in personal life and in the Quantel world and all that sort of stuff. So my apologies for not making any videos, but here it is. So first off, I want to thank my loyal patrons for all of their support. With their help and contributions, which means I can carry on restoring things like this Quantel Paintbox and other stuff. So if you want to help out, put some money into the pot, become a patron, get some fringe benefits and join the community. Links will be in the video description. I also want to thank PCBWay for sponsoring this episode. PCBWay is a one-stop solution for PCB manufacturing and assembly. They have a huge range of options here. I've used them myself. I know they offer great service, a really friendly and quick turnaround. They also offer 3D printing, CNC machining, sheet metal fabrication and injection moulding. And not only that, they've got a huge range of community-made projects that you can go and click and buy. If you want to go and check out PCBWay to see what they can do for you, the links will be in the video description. So, you may remember in part 7 of the restoration of this, we were in the process of developing our own SMD Hard Disk Emulator. This was going to plug into the back of the DPB and it would have emulated the SMD hard disk which would have gone along with this, which is, it's not here, it's downstairs. It's a big 14-inch hard disk, absolutely enormous. Now at the moment we have floppy disks that are for this machine. Also, the community has uncovered a number of floppy disks from another DPB that was used at Blackpool College. Nobody's seen those, what's on those disks since then, so that would have been mid-80s. And we also have things like this. This is a CDC, Control Data Corporation disk pack. This is an 80 megabyte removable hard disk. Very much like I guess it's like an early version of SideQuest and things like that. So these were used on the Paintbox in TV studios and post-production houses as a large storage drive that was removable and you could transfer it between different systems. This was loaned to me by Bo of Dizzy TV. He is based in the US. Some of you may remember I've done some work for him before when I recovered some Quantel MO discs. Remember those, the Quantel MO discs used on the later systems? But he also worked at a couple of places, including MTV, and that's where he used this drive to store his work at MTV when he was using the Quantel Paintbox, one of these, back in the 1980s. So, if we have a reliable place to put data and images, then it means we can start recovering images of stuff like this, and I think that's going to be really, really interesting. And of course, not only that, there's the images that might potentially be on my hard disk, which is downstairs. So having a solution where we can actually have a full working hard drive is absolutely essential. Now, one of my patrons happened to come across a listing on eBay for a hard disk emulator, an SMD hard disk emulator. It's a commercial product, so these would have been eye-wateringly expensive back in the day because they were made for a very specific purpose. I've actually gone and bought it. I've got it here. I have it all set up, configured for the DPB. It is working, and now my DPB is almost fully functional. There's just a few things now that need to be fixed. The video input doesn't work, and there's a few things like the lights on the front here don't come on, so I need to figure out what that is. But for the most part, this is now actually almost fully working because I've got that hard disk emulator now. So I'm going to go through all of this in this video, explain to you what the SMD emulator is doing, and I can show you all the features that now work on the DPB. Because it's turned what was a clunky old thing when I was using the Gotek floppy emulator into a much more interesting thing to use. So let me rearrange the camera and I will show you the SMD disk emulator because that's quite interesting. And then we'll power up the DPB and I'll show you it in action. So this is the actual hard disk emulator. This is actually a commercial product. This would have been designed somewhere around the mid 1990s. This was designed specifically for the types of people that would have been using those old SMD hard disks, and they were starting to get unreliable. They might need replacing because they might have been in service for 15, 20 years by that point, and they were needing replacements for them. They didn't want to replace the entire host system that was running on it. They just wanted to replace the hard disk with something else, and that's what these specific devices were made for. So the types of organisations that might have been using these would have been like financial institutions, maybe defence, military applications, where you might install some hardware into somewhere, and it gets used for like 20 or 30 years without changing. That's what these were designed for. It's a proper professional bit of kit to replace those old SMD hard disks. Now, because of that, they would have been extremely expensive. Although the company that made this doesn't make this model anymore, they do have something equivalent to it today, which they still make. They are the last manufacturer of SMD emulators, and they're still going, and their current product is around about $15,000. So this, back in the 1990s, would have been really a top-notch bit of kit. And I believe Quantel was actually buying this specific emulator for use with the DPB. So quite clearly there was people back in the 90s who wanted to keep their DPB running, and they actually bought these devices. Tucked away in the user guide, there is actually details on setting up for a Quantel Paintbox, which is quite remarkable that I've ended up picking this up, not being aware of any of that, and it turns out it's literally just specifically the right product for what I want. Now, the only downside to using this was the cost. It was listed up on eBay for £550 plus delivery. So all in, it's about 560 something pounds this has cost me to buy. Not an insignificant amount of money. But that's why I have my patrons. That's why they're here to support and help get this machine running by funding stuff like this. Because I would not be able to fund this on my own. I need patrons to be able to do it. So this is made up of two units. We've got the actual emulator, which is on the top here, and then we've got a power supply. Now, these were actually designed to replace 8-inch SMD hard disks. The actual size of this box is the same size as one of the old 8-inch SMD hard disks. So you would have just taken the old one out, plugged this in place, and it would have just worked instead of the hard disk, which is why we are using one of the original Fujitsu SMD hard disk power supplies, which is a bit totally overkill for running the emulator, but it's designed to just plug straight into what would have been the existing power supply for the old hard disk. So if we talk about who actually makes this, it's made by a company called Arade. They have links with a UK company called Solid State Discs as well. I believe they're all part of the same group. So this is a US product, designed and built in the US. There's a number of different models which are kind of similar. Some have more functions than others, some are designed to do different things, but they are all based around the same sort of architecture. This specific model is the EID1C, which is a caching version of the SMD emulator. So this has 384 megabytes of RAM in it, and which means it can effectively cache the entire DPB hard disk in RAM. You can see in here it's a little bit messy with it when it comes to wiring, but this would have been a low volume product, don't forget. So in the middle here we have the actual SMD emulator. So this takes the SMD wiring, which comes in at the back with this This is ECL differential, so it's a bit of a weird old school signalling system, requires some really weird voltages and all sorts of stuff. So the SMD comes in, is converted by this board that's on the top here into TTL logic, and then it disappears down onto two other boards which are further down. I'm not going to take this apart to show you because there's not really that much to see. But the next board down has a load of a couple of FPGAs on it and some RAM, and then underneath that is a little control board which runs an 80188 CPU. This gives us an RS-232 port at the back here, which we can use to log in and configure it. Where is this actually storing the data? Well, just here we have a SCSI to compact flash converter. So originally, back in the 90s, this would have likely had a 3.5-inch SCSI hard disk inside it. So the SMD emulator would have converted the SMD to SCSI and then written to a SCSI hard disk. This unit dates from much later, well into the noughties. So the SCSI hard disk has been replaced by this compact flash adapter. One thing that's happened because I've got the SMD emulator is everything just works so much quicker. So it doesn't take very long to boot up. So let's just turn this on. You'll just have a black screen for the moment. Soon enough it will go white. And in a few moments time we have a cursor. So given that what we had last time, whenever we brought up the menus or anything like that, there was this massive delay where it had to load all the brushes off the floppy disk all the time, which added massive delays in. But as you can see, it's a lot quicker. You can just swipe on, swipe off. It's just a massive improvement over using the floppy drive. There was also, if you recall, occasionally when I went and brought the menus up, the text would get corrupted, things like that. That doesn't happen at all now. I'm not seeing that since I've swapped to using the SMD Hard Disk Emulator. So everything is just so much slicker. You know, for example, painting in the palette was really laggy and horrible before, and that is much improved. So yeah, that works so much better than it did before. So before we look at the painting functions, one of the biggest things that we've got with the hard disk now is we can actually load and save. So we can actually use the library. We can do find, picture, and this will bring up all the pictures that are on the disk. These are ones that I've been creating since I've been tinkering around with this after getting the hard disk working. So if I load up something, you can see there, it loads up. There's no corruption. It's all just working as it should be. And it's so much quicker than using the floppy drive. In fact, I think the floppy drive is 10 times slower than the hard disk, so it made a massive difference. So let's start by showing you paste up, because that wasn't available at all when we had the floppy drive. It just wouldn't work at all. This is partly because when you use paste up, it generates temporary files on the hard disk that it uses while you're doing the paste up functions. So without being able to do that when I had the floppy drive, the paste up just didn't work at all. So what we're going to do now is generate some text with those fonts. So what I'm going to do now is find text font. This lists all the fonts that are on the machine. Select Eurostyle, go into the paste up, and what we're going to do is generate some text on the stencil, and then I can put some effects on it, just so I can show you the sort of things that you might have been using this machine for. So if we do a draw stencil and then generate some text. Just increase the size of that. Will do. So we now have this as a paste up item which is generating a stencil. So let's stick that into the stencil. Turn off the stencil. So what I can do now is actually go into graphics. We want rectangles, we want graduated. Let's pick something like blue. And we'll go to cyan. So if I do display stencil, reverse, build everything on. Yeah. Oh. Oh, I forgot to turn the stencil on there, so you can see it's just generated a graduated box. But actually, if I do use stencil now and actually do it the other way around, top to bottom, we can do that. So a little mistake actually made things look a bit more interesting. So yeah, that's demonstrating use of paste up with the stencils to generate some interesting text. So we can also cut and paste just normal items as well. So we can actually cut out the picture. So this just allows us to cut out a part of the image, and then it becomes a paste up item that we can then pick up and then move around, place it somewhere else, do something with it. We also have the rat, so we can pick that up and actually we can rotate it. And we can also, we've got these statistical entry points, so we can actually type in stuff in here, so we can actually change the X and Y size of it. So we can take that and stick it down somewhere. Now, there's a few other things that we can do. We've also got things like outline and surround. You might have seen those before on the later machines, but I can quickly demonstrate those to you. If we do, if we go back to the text, and actually cut this out again. We can actually put on outline, and what this will do when I stick it down, it creates an outline of it, or we surround. It puts a black border around it. Solid will, I can't remember what this one does actually. Let's try it. That's a solid background, and we also have a shadow background, slightly different, but it creates a similar sort of effect. And we've got emboss as well. Which generates like an embossed look to it. So one of the other things we have available to us is the smear function. So if I just cut out again the picture with the stencil, actually let's painting, we'll draw a stencil. With chalk. What we can do now, go into paste up, reverse that, cut out the picture and the stencil together. So now we've cut out that section, and it's now on the end of our brush through the stencil. So you can see there it's blended in where the stencil was. So what we can do with that, now we have it on our brush, we can turn it into a smear, which allows us to paint with the brush. So we can actually do that, which that is quite cool. Cool thing. You've got to remember, this is 1981. You had these options. So yeah, definitely a cool option, that one. And we can also flip and tumble, which just turns it round into a different orientation. Smudge is very similar, but it actually smudges the background. Based on the shape of the cutout. So that's pretty much all of the paste up items. There is a couple more. We have live video here. So what this would have done is the paste up item that I've got, this bit here, this would have been floating on our pen, and we would have had live video in the background. But because the video input isn't working yet, that unfortunately is not an option that I can show you just at the moment, but watch this space. So what's new in painting that wasn't working before? So there are a couple of options in here which weren't available to us before. The old and new stores weren't available because they require the hard disk. So this allows us to have two alternative work areas. So if I just tap down on old, you can see it brings up two images. So these are two separate pictures that I have easy access to. So you didn't have these as an option before. Now, some of the painting functions which weren't available to us previously were special, because this again uses the hard disk as a temporary buffer space. So in here we have three tools called Blur, Crisp and Smooth. Blur uses the paintbrush, or whatever brush you're using, to slightly blur the image. You might struggle a little bit to see this, but it's quite a subtle effect. So you can see there it just blurs the image just very, very slightly. Smooth is very similar, but it's just not quite as aggressive as the blur. Crisp works the opposite way, so it sharpens. You probably won't be able to see that actually happening. There's probably not really enough detail there. So one of the functions which was Paintbox was quite famous for was blending two images together. So you'd have your current working picture, then you'd have a background picture, and you'd be able to paint through one to the other. It's called Restore, and we actually have that working now. So I turn off Crisp and go onto the Restore function. What we'll do, we go onto the chalk brush, We're on the largest size, so I'm going to restore the new picture, which is this coloured picture here, and restore it onto the current working area. So if I just start painting, it blends the two images together. This is using the chalk brush at the moment. And of course I can actually use the stencil, so if I wanted to, I can actually use the stencil to do it. So back to special, restore chalk. And now I'll actually be able to restore that through the stencil using the chalk brush. So you can see this would have been quite a useful function to have when you're trying to composite two types of images together to create effects. So I could reverse the stencil and now use the other saved picture. So yeah, you can create some really quite funky things. So there's a couple of things in effects which you might not have seen before, so I'll just quickly show you them here. These are available on the newer machines as well. So we've got overlay mode that allows us to create a stencil based on the luminance value in the picture. So if you've got a high con, like a matte that you're going to use for compositing, things like that, you can use the overlay function to generate a stencil from it. Field mode is when you're actually capturing live video from a camera. If you've got a moving image, you get that cone effect as the two fields are different from each other. So that allows you to paint out one field over the other. Colour map is quite an interesting one because I believe it was used quite a lot in TV. So if we just load in a palette, go to effects. So this is the palette that I've got. Now what colour map does is it takes the luminance value in the image and then maps it to an area on the palette. So the dark colours would be red and the lightest colours would be this brown colour. So let's just show you that. We've got the stencil on. Let's just reverse it. There we go. So that can be used to create some interesting effects. Mosaic is your standard pixelate function. I'll just change the size of the pixels down. We can use the pixelate function. Create all sorts of cool effects. Having this hard disk emulator here has made a massive difference. The fact that I'm now actually I can load and save, I'm starting to recover the fonts that were on the floppy disks. So I've got 11 of them loaded on there, and I'm going through my stack of disks slowly and converting these, loading them onto the machine. It's really pushed forward getting this machine up and running fully. As I said, there's still a few things to do. The Video input needs to be looked at because I think it's an absolutely critical part of this machine to be able to have video input. So you can actually bring video in and actually start editing it rather than actually just generating original artwork on it. So looking at the video input card is going to be one thing. There's a couple of other things like the lights on the front panel don't actually seem to come on properly, so that's something that's going to need to be looked at. It's all these little things now that I can start, just putting little bits of spit and polish on and just getting it fixed up. Okay, I'll call it quits there. That's about where we're up to. There's still going to be more videos to come on this. As I said, there's still a few things to look at. There's the video input card, that needs to be sorted out. There's a couple of lights on the front panel which don't light up. Don't know why, so those are going to have to be looked at. So there's definitely more parts to the DPB restoration coming along very soon. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you on the next video. Bye for now.